us today. I know you're very, very busy, so I very much appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us today and talk about Bioregional and your One Planet Living framework.
There we go. I was just saying it's the first time I've used Zoom, I think, in a while, probably since COVID time. So I'm a proper Teams Microsoft convert. So
Okay.
I'm just sort of navigating myself. So hopefully you can all see that.
We can see it. Yep.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm just going to give you hopefully a really sort of quick overview as to sort of Bioregional, who we are, what we do, and then I'm going to talk through the One Planet Living framework, and give a very sort of high level overview as to what it is, but then I think crucially how I use it and how we use it within the built environment. So just a really quick background to myself. I actually celebrated my 10-year anniversary at Bioregional last week. So yeah, it feels strange working somewhere for a decade, but that image you can see in the background of my first slide there is Elmsbrook. Some of you will probably know it, the UK's first eco town just outside Bicester. I'm going to touch on that right at the end of my presentation, and it's sort of where I sort of cut my teeth at Bioregional. And now I lead our sustainable places team, so all of our work within the built environment, and we're a team of about 10 built environment professionals, a mixture of sort of engineers and sustainability generalists. So that's just a real high level overview of myself. So if I just move forward, so there we go. So a little bit about Bioregional. Some of you will have heard of us. We're what we call ourselves is a purpose-led sustainability consultancy, but we're also a charity and a social enterprise. I always like to think of us as a sort of fairly ancient when it comes to the sustainability world, in sort of being close to 30 years old. It's now an absolutely booming sector. Lots of sustainability organizations and companies cropping up almost on a weekly basis. What do we do? Pretty much as it says there, and this is sort of who we work with. So Bioregional, we work alongside businesses to help do their carbon reporting, carbon footprinting, help on their sustainable products and materials. And then that's where I work, which is in that middle sector there, which is in the built environment. And you can see in the Venn diagram, there's lots of crossover. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment with sort of large corporates that have large portfolios and estates. And then we also work on that right-hand side, actually a lot over the past sort of 2 years, working with a number of local authorities, helping to create their sort of zero carbon evidence bases. So worked alongside people like the Greater Cambridge Authority, Central Lincolnshire, and also a number of authorities within Oxfordshire to help create their net zero policies. So that's sort of who we are and sort of where we work with. We also like to think that we're kind of on the innovative edge. So on the left-hand side, that's Oxfordshire Green Tech. I'm the founder and director of that business network. So trying to grow and represent the low zero carbon economy across Oxfordshire. And we work very closely with our sort of sister organisation up in Cambridge called Cambridge Clean Tech. And we're actually based, our London office is based in the Sustainable Ventures workspace as well, based at Waterloo. So sort of across those three organizations that we know, we think we have access to sort of thousands of innovative products and organizations as well. So yeah, as I said here, 30 years old. We are, I always like to think of ourselves as a unique consultancy. We're not a sort of stack them high, sell them cheap. We operate a sort of bespoke approach to sort of every single project that we work on. And I'm just going to really quickly just go over the sort of three areas that we work in. So we work a lot in the new build area, all the way through from sort of pre-planning, visioning, all the way through to kind of more technical elements such as whole life carbon assessments, energy strategies, BREEAM, as well as crucially working at the sort of post occupancy stage as well. So we do a lot of work in the new build. We do a lot of work with local authorities, so we're probably working with a dozen local authorities at the moment, helping them with their net zero evidence bases, writing supplementary planning documents, helping them also with development management, so helping them to actually assess applications.
I saw your the retrofit guide you did with Cambridgeshire. I thought that was very, very good. It was, as a resource, as a punter, I found it really, really useful in terms of
Yeah, thanks
how,
for that.
where
So,
to
so
what, it also was frightening because it listed the type of, well, obviously it listed the type of house that I connect with, and scary how much it would cost to
oh
retrofit.
yeah, the cost is the, I think so we can't take all of the credit for that. So we worked alongside actually a really fantastic passive house architect, PAS 2035 certified as well, based in Oxfordshire, called Transition by Design, who we've been working with for the past decade actually. So they did a lot of the kind of actual archetype modeling behind that. But yeah, somewhere in the region, I think it was £3 to £4 billion just for Cambridge City to retrofit all of the private homes to a sort of zero carbon standard. So you can see the kind of the challenge that we face. So that's a really good crossover actually. So the kind of third area that we work in is on the existing estate and retrofit. So we've been doing exactly as you said, doing retrofit guides, but also helping large portfolio owners with their sort of net zero pathway as well. And we've also done quite a bit of work with the Rural Community Energy Fund. So we've worked with 4 local community groups to look at whole village-wide decarbonisation strategies, so based around the creation of a heat network. And we did the original feasibility study, some of you may have heard of it, for the Swaffham Prior scheme up in South Cambridgeshire, which is the sort of one of the first rural heat network schemes that is actually sort of in operation now. I think they've got upwards of about 60 homes connected to that. So yeah, those are those sort of 3 areas: new build, local authority, and the existing retrofit. So that's just hopefully a really quick introduction to sort of us and who we are. So I'm going to talk now about the One Planet Living framework, and I can't talk about the One Planet Living framework without talking about BedZED, because that is where the One Planet Living framework came from. So really the thinking behind BedZED was very much in the in the mind of One Planet Living. But really after the creation of this, in terms Bioregional working alongside Peabody, Bill Dunster Architects, and a whole range of different engineers, a lot of people said, well, how did you come up with BedZED? How did you think about it? And that was where this concept of One Planet Living came from. So that was our headquarters for 20 years. Our chief exec still lives there. Members of staff still live there. But as of last year, we moved away for business reasons. And we're now based, as I said, at the Sustainable Ventures workspace, but still a really strong connection to Bioregional. We still do weekly tours, and still thousands of people still visit it every year. But BedZED really is at the heart of what One Planet Living is. And it was this meeting of minds of this sort of more technical metrics around sustainability, around how do we reduce electricity use, heat use, water use, how do we encourage people through the design and layout of the development to travel less and sort of consume less as well. So there's very much this sort of hard environmental metric mixed with the kind of softer, more qualitative side, which is actually the area that kind of really interests me, which is around, yes, you can save people money through their electricity and heating bills. You can reduce water use and therefore reduce water stress. You can reduce emissions from transport. But actually, ultimately, how do you encourage people to be really happy? How do you get people to really love where they live? And so there's some there's some really good data coming out from BedZED, particularly around self-reporting on happiness and this sense of community and kind of civic pride. And one of the metrics there was residents of BedZED know more than 20 of their neighbours by name, and that is sort of 4 times the average. And I think that is down to the type of people that live there that are sort of tend to gravitate towards that development, but also I think it's down to the sort of design and sort of layout of the scheme. You can see in the top left hand corner there, you can see the kind of shared walkways over into the sort of garden areas. You can see the car-free areas in the top right hand side there. You can see in the bottom right the kind of community garden area, and also the kind of pavilion space in the bottom left as well. So all of those elements contributing to sort of creating more of that kind of community spirit. And I think we're starting to see that a lot through a lot of the kind of co-housing and sort of community-led developments that we're seeing. So really, if we were to boil down what is One Planet Living, I always think about it in these three areas. Well, it's a vision, right? It's a vision that hopefully everyone can understand and sort of buy into. And I should probably get this sort of tattooed on my forehead, but it's a vision of the world where everyone everywhere can enjoy a happy, healthy life within the limits of our one planet. So it's that sort of vision statement. It's also a framework, so it breaks down that vision into sort of 10 principles, and I'm going to touch on those in a minute. But it's also an initiative in terms of we have a recommended process that we go through the way that we work with, in this instance, with developers. But I think crucially, it's totally free. Anyone can use it. Anyone can pick it up and use it in any way that they would really like to. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about it. We're often just find community groups in Brighton, in York, in Australia, just picking it up and using it as a way to structure their kind of response to sustainability. It's totally free. We have lots of resources on the website. We're just actually updating, should be released in July, that are kind of updated, what we call our goals and guidance for new development. So in there, it will break down the 10 principles, give indications of best practice KPI metrics and targets as well. So that's sort of, if I was to distill One Planet Living, that's what it is. It's a vision, it's a framework, but it's also a sort of an initiative as well. And so where does that concept of One Planet Living comes from? And it comes from quite a scary place. I always think that it's quite scary that in the UK we are sort of consuming resources well beyond our one planet. In fact, the average citizen of the UK, and indeed most of Western Europe, we'd actually need 3 planets to support our lifestyle. So One Planet Living is very much about how do we reduce that impact, but also it's recognizing that there are millions, if not billions, of people on our planet under that one planet use of resources. So it's about bringing those high impact countries and areas down, but also trying to bring up the sort of lifestyles of those that are less fortunate and poorer. And so we work with a whole range of different clients and partners to help create One Planet projects and One Planet companies and organizations. And you can see the 10 principles on the right hand side there. And I'm just I'm gonna pause on that, and I'm going to show you those in a little bit more detail in a minute. But I thought this is quite an interesting diagram, one that I put together a couple of years back, showing the sort of breakdown of our sort of 3 planet lifestyle, or just under 3 planet lifestyle at the moment, and really what is the role of the built environment and the role of developers. So you can see the average ecological footprint there. So you can see about a quarter made up of our housing, almost another quarter made up of transport, food and consumer goods making up another large percentage, and then the sort of final area there, looking at the sort of services that operate in the UK, large infrastructure such as harbours and airports and major road building as well. But you can see in terms of the development industry can have a huge impact on key areas of that, particularly around the type of housing. Absolutely, that's probably the most obvious one, but also crucially around transport, around how do we design places that encourage people to use less private car usage. How do we encourage people to grow their own food, to consume low impact diets? How do we create places that encourage people to reuse, recycle, so all of our work within the built environment tries to sort of push people in those particular areas there. So it does go to show that as a development industry, we do actually have impact over quite a large area, whereas actually I think going back 10 years, it was probably far more focused on how do we just design houses, or how can we design lower impact houses, whereas I think we need to have a more holistic, comprehensive view, which is actually looking at the impact that we can have on people's lifestyles.
I don't know whether it's a coincidence, but Exeter City, their city plan seems to follow the same ethos of the framework. I mean, the development land that they are focusing on, any new builds will be in the brownfield sites within the city. It's, you know, with the eyes on minimizing transport, etc.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. We're doing quite a bit of a really emerging area of sort of work that we're doing with local authorities now is around spatial, the kind of, well, yeah, the carbon implications of spatial planning. So we've developed a tool that we've done it a number of times now, looking at the carbon associated with different spatial growth options. So local authorities will often have a number of scenarios like, do I grow here, do I grow there, do I grow in sort of both places? And so we've developed a tool, and actually we've got an application into Innovate UK to refine that further and spend a lot more sort of research time in sort of making that better, because we think that will be a really powerful tool to be able for local authorities to be able to make spatial decisions based on carbon, which is if you grow here, the carbon implications of that is going to be significantly higher because predominantly of transport than if you were to build, say, exactly as you said, that Exeter are proposing in more sort of densely, in more denser brownfield sort of town centre, city centre locations. So yeah. So the 10 principles, these used to be the other way around actually. About 5-6 years ago, we used to start with carbon and end with health and happiness, but actually we flipped it around, and we always start with health and happiness, because we think that's actually absolutely crucial to all of the places that we sort of have a role within. You know, we ultimately want to create really happy and healthy people within those spaces, and this is why we think One Planet Living, people like it, is because it's quite visual, and it's sort of quite comprehensive and holistic as well, in terms of covering all the sort of facets of sustainability, from these sort of more social metrics around equity, around culture and around community, through to the kind of more harder metrics around, say, net biodiversity gain, around zero waste to landfill, and ultimately around zero carbon energy as well. So those are the sort of 10 principles, and I'm going to show you sort of how we use those. So this is what I would say is a sort of typical One Planet Living process, sort of how we get involved in the built environment. So and I'm going to break these down, and I'm going to show you sort of examples and sort of why we do these. So typically we get involved really early, and we tend to do what we call a local needs analysis. So that tends to be a site visit. We do a lot of desktop research, pull together what are the key needs at sort of different sort of spatial views. So we tend to look at a sort of planetary basis, and then at a regional basis, and then also at a sort of local basis. Like, what are those needs? What is actually driving this development? We then use that to help develop development objectives. We then tend to vision this. We tend to have a lot of visioning exercises with the design team, with the architects, with the developer, depending on the stage that they're at. That then helps to create a sustainability brief. We then work quite sort of in depth with the design team to help create a sustainability strategy, or sometimes we call them One Planet action plans. Ultimately, that usually ends up creating a sustainability statement for planning, and then we like to work sort of beyond that sort of planning line. We like to get involved at the sort of post planning, detailed design, and ultimately at the sort of post occupancy stage as well. And you'll notice there in the sort of bottom right hand, the kind of bottom right hand corner of there, we have something that we call One Planet Leadership. So as well as this being a free as a sort of free framework for anyone to pick up, and this is just our typical process that Bioregional works on schemes. We also have a sort of a leadership or a kind of endorsement process where developers or communities can submit their action plan, their strategy to us. We have a separate peer review team that will review that, and we can give our sort of impartial one planet leadership stamp, and that's how we've been working with Greencore for the past 5-6 years, and we're continuing to work with them, so giving them our sort of endorsement that actually they really are pushing the boundaries. Yeah, so that's the sort of typical process that we work with. So I'm just gonna go through some of those levels, and I think also show you what some of those outputs look like. So this is an executive summary of our sort of needs analysis that we've done for a particular scheme. So it gives a really high level view on some of the key needs and drivers. And in effect, it becomes the sort of sustainability due diligence. It becomes your baseline. It becomes everything that you're then building your objectives and your strategy around. So here, this is for a particular scheme in South Oxfordshire. So we're looking at really sort of local metrics around emissions, around recycling rates, around aging population. Again, this is just a sort of visual executive summary. Going into a little bit more detail, you can see here, you know, the needs analysis. You know, we're focusing on things around sort of childhood obesity, around loneliness, around mental health, around car ownership, around crime, around noise, around air pollution, as well as fuel poverty, as well as food waste, as well as all range of different metrics. We spend a lot of time kind of hoovering up all of that data and then providing our view on it. And you can see on the right hand side, we're just starting to use that needs analysis to start to think about objectives and start to think about how can this scheme or how can a scheme respond to those particular needs. So this is actually a scheme up in Manchester that we've been working with for the past year now.
But would that scheme be a social housing provider or a open market developer?
The mixture. So there is there's a real mixture. So there is some affordable, there's some build to rent, and there's some also market, as well as hundreds of thousands of square foot of kind of real estate in terms of commercial and retail and office. So from those needs, you know, that kind of due diligence, what's the area telling us? We use that to help set objectives. So in this example here, we've responded to those needs, and there's some real objectives there around enhancing open green space, around safe travel, around thermal comfort, around protecting from noise. So in this particular site, there's a lot of noise pollution. It's very close to sort of major arterial roads. So we begin to set those development objectives. We then like to get quite creative and do quite a few visioning exercises. So you can hear so you can see just some of the kind of outputs from our kind of visioning exercises. We work with the design team. We do kind of future casting, disaster casting. Like, what if we do nothing? What if we make the worst scheme? What does it look like? How do we work back to ensure that those decisions don't happen? We tend to do a lot of day in the life exercises. So we create personas. We get the team to sort of adopt these personas and start to think about how they might interact with the particular scheme. And then we bring that together into a sort of high level sustainability vision. And yeah, here's a good example of sort of some of the day in the life on the left hand side, and we do a number of these. They then get used in sort of marketing material, or they might get used in sort of vision documents. So in this instance, how does a particular individual interact with the scheme? What's on offer to this particular person? And on the right hand side, we're sort of in the middle of COVID, when we were sort of still trying to do these. We tried to do these in person, but we were having to do them virtually. So using sort of interactive whiteboards and software such as Mural. So starting to think about what could a day in the life look like from the design point of view, from construction and also operation as well. And then after, so we've done the needs analysis, we've helped to develop objectives, we've then started to bring together that kind of visioning. We then use that to create an action plan with really clear KPIs, metrics, and targets. So again, using those 10 principles of One Planet Living, this is just a screenshot of one of those pages. So this is the travel and transport principle. Looking at those objectives, looking at the rationale for those objectives, where do they come from? In this instance, I've sort of split it by must, should, and could. So what are the things you have to do? You're mandated to do these, but by the local plan, by internal sort of corporate targets. What are the things that we really should be doing? So this is sort of where our own professional advice comes in. You need to be doing this. And then the more kind of, I guess, sort of innovative edge of things to kind of explore and discuss, like what could you be doing? So that's just one example. Another sort of example of way we've cut it. This hasn't come out very well. Apologies, it looks a bit blurry on the screen. But what we've done is we've sort of had the sort of the minimum, like what is the minimum thing you need to be do, and then we kind of have best practice, and then we have sort of pioneering. So and then we work with the design team to kind of fix that particular level. So different ways of cutting the pie in that way. So yeah, we developed that brief and that kind of framework around the 10 principles. Then we have another sort of tool that we tend to work with. So crucially, what we don't want to be is we don't want to be passive in the situation. We don't want to be going, right, we've told you what to do, or we've told you what we think that you should be doing, and now we're just going to walk away, and then we'll come in at the end and we'll write you a nice statement at the end. That's not what we want to do. It's not where the impact lives. The impact lives in this sort of tracking, this sort of middle bit, which is where you do a lot of this conceptual visioning and brief setting, but then you also track that and you hold people to account, and we hold the team to account. So often we position ourselves sort of client side, and we will sit kind of on the client's shoulder and go, right, we will now track all those lovely things we said we were going to do. And so here's just an example of a particular scheme where we take all of those commitments and we are sort of tracking them through that design process. And this works really nicely actually post planning as well, because we can go, these are the things we actually committed to at planning, or you committed to at planning. How are we going to make sure that we see those through into the sort of detailed technical design? So on the left-hand side, you can see a bit of a dashboard there. So you can see the 10 principles and sort of where we are in terms of progress against those commitments. So we often do a sort of risk register at sort of key design team meetings and go, we'll sort of wave the kind of red flag and go, right, these areas that we said we were going to be doing, they're now at risk, and we'll often deep dive and help problem solve. So another way, hopefully another really interesting way of how One Planet Living can be used to kind of track that that kind of design process. And increasingly now we're seeing that we're getting appointed post planning where we have been appointed pre-planning, which I think goes to show the way that the industry is sort of moving, that people do want to sort of fulfill those commitments that they did make at planning. Or maybe I'm just being very optimistic in terms of the sort of developers that we work with, and actually the mainstream is a bit like a cruise ship. It's sort of taking quite a while to sort of move, and we're working with the far more agile, nimble developers that are trying to sort of position themselves, for example, like Ian at Greencore. And then one of the final areas is we sort of bring together that whole sustainability narrative into a sustainability statement. So this example of an extra care scheme in Bristol. So one of the things that people sort of feedback to me is, oh, it's really nice to have a document that pulls together the transport strategy, the energy strategy, the social value strategy, the sort of demolition the kind of pre-demolition audit, all that information kind of gets distilled into one place, and we use the 10 principles as a way to visualize that, and also crucially for this as a planning document, show compliance against policy. You can see on the right hand side there, I've produced a kind of matrix of how the particular core strategy and development management policies in Bristol link to the 10 principles. So, for example, a case officer could go, I'm really focused, or maybe the conservation officer is like, right, I'm really hyper focused on the heritage issues that relate to DM31, for example, this one down here. They can go, right, I know I need to go to the culture and community section of this sustainability statement, and they can dive straight in and see how the development is responding to that. So that's oh, that was probably meant to be another example, but skipped over that. Yeah, and then yeah, this just again shows another example of a sustainability statement that I've done for that we've done for a scheme in Milton Keynes, for example. So here, land and nature, how it links to policies, their objectives, and then also crucially how they're actually, like, what are they actually doing to meet those objectives? So how are they going to ensure a net positive contribution to local biodiversity? So a little bit more detail in there about the net gain strategy, but then also imagery and also references to further documentation within, say, the landscape, within the landscape strategy and landscape plan. So that in a nutshell is the process. That's a bit of a whistle stop. Hopefully gives a good understanding as to how something quite high level in terms of those 10 principles and how we actually use that in anger on a wide range of developments.
And is there a minimum size scheme, or is there a scheme of a size that makes sense to utilize your?
It's a great question, and my answer would be, I think One Planet Living can be used absolutely anywhere. In fact, it's been used on a single property, as well as it's been used on an entire city. So, for example, the city of Fremantle in Western Australia uses One Planet Living to kind of structure their response to sustainability and climate change. That I feel is one of the beauties of it, in terms of it's very context driven. So, for example, the action plan for Springfield Meadows with Greencore, for example, is going to be very different to a 5,000 master plan, 5,000 home master plan that we're developing. The 10 principles stay the same, but actually what they mean and how they're interpreted change. What I would say is, on the much smaller schemes, I feel like it's our role. So Bioregional's role is far more light touch. It's a far more mentoring kind of coaching role, where we'll sort of drop in and be like, this is how we think you should use it. This is what we'd expect you to do. And we'll often act as that sort of review. So they'll often send us something, we'll review it, do a little workshop to say, we think you can be stronger here. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Whereas on much bigger schemes, we tend to have a far more sort of hands-on role, and we will kind of own that entire process. But it's a really good tee up actually to sort of some of my next slides here. So we've used One Planet Living at a sort of site promotion, sort of visionary stage with Summix on a number of large master plans. We've also used it on sort of the mixed use high-rise scheme. So this is that Milton Keynes scheme. So working with a very small developer called Socius, where we've acted as that sustainability champion and sort of created the brief and sort of tracked that through the planning process. And now we're at that sort of detailed design stage. We've used it at that master plan stage, so working with Landsec on a big garden community scheme over in Essex. We've used it on regeneration schemes. So this is the St Anne's Hospital regeneration scheme over in Haringey. And then you'll also be aware, we've used it on kind of quite boutique, small, very, very innovative and exemplar scheme with Greencore at Springfield Meadows. And I guess the sort of the one that I'm closest to, where we use One Planet Living as a way to sort of structure the sustainability strategy, is Elmsbrook. So some of you may know it, but yeah, so the red line that you can see there is the allocation for Northwest Bicester, one of the 4 national eco towns, a competition created by the New Labour government back in 2007, 2008, I think it was. Northwest Bicester was one of those selected. It's the only one coming through, or still coming through, in the original guise. There's a whole raft of sort of policy requirements that sit behind that. And actually Bioregional were involved in sort of setting those requirements. And there's a very interesting sort of crossover between the 10 principles of one planet living and those specific requirements for the ecotown. You can see that yellow sort of odd shape. That's what we call the exemplar phase, or is now called Elmsbrook. You can see that, and you can see that there now. This image is a few years old now, but you can see sort of phase 1 and phase 2 and the school at the back, and sort of moving into sort of phase 3 and 4 that are actually off the screen now. And just a little overview of it. So it's one of the policy requirements was around true zero carbon, and so that covers net zero. That covers the regulated and the unregulated emissions. So again, there's a sort of definition conversation to have. I think that's one of the real issues in the industry at the moment, and maybe less for this call. But yeah, I know particularly within local authorities and working with other developers, there's a lot of confusion over what does net zero mean. So here I've just outlined a bit of the kind of strategy, and very happy to have a conversation or to present separately on this. It's quite a thorny discussion, particularly around the definition of net zero. And then when you see that last bullet point and you kind of go, well, how could you be net zero when you've got a gas CHP engine? And the very quick non-technical answer is it's of its time. When this was planned, it was 2010. It was an entirely different landscape when it came to zero carbon. Sort of heat pumps weren't really market ready. And I remember my first day at Bioregional, I was invited to a workshop around the energy strategy, and I remember the energy consultant saying, "Yep, so we're going to do a heat network." And I'd just come from the building research establishment where I'd spent 3 years talking about heat networks with local authorities, and I just remember shaking my head, going, "I just don't think this is the best. I don't think this is the best route. I don't think this is what we should be doing." So the zero carbon calculation is based on a balance between the carbon factors at that particular time and where gas CHP looked very favorable compared to grid electricity. So that's the kind of snapshot of it, and I can talk at length another time on that if needed. But you can see here it was very much sort of ahead of its time, particularly around sort of glazing, particularly around fabric efficiency. Now a number of this is probably far more mainstream, but if you think about the scheme being sort of 10 years in the sort of making, it was, I think, at the time, the largest domestic solar array with about 35 square meters of PV on sort of every roof. And it also started the conversation around embodied carbon. Embodied carbon in the mainstream wasn't really being considered at this particular time, and it was a sort of 30% reduction on a sort of typical build at that time, through things like timber frame from Stuart Milne, pre-insulated floor cassettes, etc., and also sort of recycled aggregate for sort of stonework, recycled clay, not recycled clay, recycle and reuse slate, for the roof tiles and things like that. So really started to sort of push that conversation. Some of the other areas, it's doing net gain before net gain was even a thing. And now we all think, oh, net gain because it's coming with the Environment Act. It did quite a bit of work around community orchards, community growing. I think with transport as well, that was the other real focus. There was a community bus provided from day one that was funded by the developer, has been for the past 10 years. There have been some changes to that bus route, I think, as of last month. Charging points, it was really a bit ahead of its time when it came to sort of charging points as well. introduction of a car club, which has latterly disappeared. But for 5 or 6 years, there was a car club being served from that scheme as well. So, and just sort of lastly, has the UK's first Passive House Plus non-residential building. It's called the Eco Business Centre. That was actually, the developer there was Cherwell, part funded by ERDF funding. But is right in the kind of heart of the community, provides a real function in terms of community, in terms of providing a place, a place for those pioneer residents to go, but also part of the transport strategy as well, providing a place for people to work from rather than driving every day to work. And it was very, I think, fortuitous with sort of COVID, this sort of change of working, the kind of future of work in terms of people now less working from a sort of formal office. I'm working from home today. I actually work from that building 1 day a week. So it kind of provides me that opportunity to kind of co-work as well. So again, I think encompasses the One Planet Living framework quite nicely in terms of touching on a lot of those different facets of those principles. And I am going to stop there actually. And there's my contact details and the contact details of my director as well. If anyone would like to sort of get in touch afterwards. Spoken for just under 45 minutes. I will shut up and stop sharing.
No, you've done well. You've covered a lot there, Lewis. Thank you very much. It's very in-depth, very inspiring actually, and yeah, it gets the old brain thinking about how this framework could be taken up by more and more local authorities, cities, and developers. Obviously, I always think with a sort of developer hat on, so it was really interesting for me. Andy's just asked a question, just picking up. I presume other people have thought it as well. Just why did the car club not last? But that's
yeah, no, it's a great question. I just answered it there, but I'll just answer it again. I think lack of use. And I think poor marketing on behalf of the car club. It was always going to be difficult because there was still quite a small community there, but it just wasn't really marketed outside of Elmsbrook. And I always just thought, thanks, Richard. I always thought, what a great opportunity to market this much wider to the people of Bicester. Whereas it was always marketed quite kind of insular. That's my opinion. Yeah, it's a real shame that it didn't sort of take off.
Yeah, absolutely. And here we go. Mariana's asked a question.
Can the One Planet to fit out project? It's interesting. I would say the answer is absolutely yes. We're actually working on 2 fit out projects. We're not explicitly using One Planet Living with the client. We use it internally as our sort of guiding lighthouse, I guess you'd call it. So working on a fit out of an office, we're working on a fit out of a distribution center. So first thing we're doing is we're doing a bit of a kind of review of their design, and then we're also doing a bit of a sort of innovation search on their materials. And so we're using the 10 principles of One Planet Living as a way to sort of guide us in our response to them. So when we're reviewing their design, we'll think, right, what's this doing under health and happiness? What's this doing under water? What's this doing under transport? So I think the answer is absolutely yes. And as I said, it's totally free for anyone to use. And so, use it as a way to kind of structure your own thinking. That's sort of how I always think about it.
And the framework helps from a planning perspective, or it helps the planners, because you're answering all of their questions and more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sort of example I showed with with the sustainability statements, we're doing more and more of those now, and I think as long as the One Planet principles are linked to policy, I think that's the key thing. The sustainability statement has to answer the policy, and so what we do right up front is we do that sort of cross mapping to show this is how the policy links with the 10 principles. Now we're going to do a number of pages on each principle to show how those policies are responded to. I think it helps it being quite colorful and being quite visual, and I always think I haven't really come across a sort of, I guess, something where it doesn't fit neatly within one of those principles. Maybe that's just me and I'm sort of quite biased and go, yeah, just chuck it in that one or whatever. But I think it covers everything.
Yeah.
And also it's very context driven as well. Whereas BREEAM, I worked at the BRE, I worked on the BREEAM schemes, and they're great. I'm not going to say a bad thing about it. But what I would say is sometimes you get quite odd sort of solutions presented. Like, for example, I always think I worked on a scheme, like an office scheme in the middle of nowhere. And it was like, well, no one's going to cycle here because it's really dangerous to cycle here. But you had to put in cycle storage.
Sure.
And it was like, well, actually, couldn't they just have used the money that you would have put in there in another way to kind of promote sustainable transport in another way? And so I think sometimes those more certification schemes can sort of push solutions, whereas I always like to think, well, actually, it needs to be delivered. It needs to be delivered on a sort of case by case, site by site basis.
Yeah.
Are you working with Architects Climate Action Network for pre-planning? Perfect fit to me. I don't think we are. Whoever Zoom user is, please can you
Did you want to come off mute?
or put some details in the chat box. I'm very happy to kind of explore that. That sounds amazing. Not sure they want to come off mute. Oh, thank you very much. They're going to connect.
Cool. And I know other people specifically wanted to join this webinar as well. I don't know if there's any questions from anyone else on the floor or points that they wanted to raise. It'd be good to hear from anyone else. I mean, going back to that point about transport and cycles and it's not about ticking boxes, but although sometimes it is. It's the reason why I asked about sort of what schemes work is because not every scheme can be designed as an Ellsbrook, because like an out of town development or whatever, they are from like you say, from a transport perspective, it is going to be tricky. You are going to create transport, so
I think that's where that needs analysis I think is really important, like early on, to kind of show, should you actually be building here? Like, is this actually a logical place to be building? And this is the thing I always do. Every single project we work on, we go through like our own internal due diligence, is because we don't want to work on every single scheme. Some schemes just, we don't want to be associated with. So we do have like an internal due diligence process. And actually, you're right. And that's where I think you need, there needs to be a level of sort of innovation, and you need to sort of be creative in terms of, an out of town office space, thinking about, people probably aren't going to cycle there. Or maybe they are, it's really disconnected from the local cycle routes. Maybe it is actually not that far away, and actually it could be quite an attractive cycle route, so that's where you need to work with the local transport authority and go, right, like, how do we make sure this is connected? What is there a section 106 opportunity there to sort of enhance or create new cycle routes to that space? That's sort of where I would sort of go to, rather than going, well, we'll just put in a load of cycle stands and just sort of hope people will cycle there and use them.
Well, you're fulfilling the planner's requirements as opposed to whether they're actually going to be used or not. And then from how you, because we've had the likes of Bellway and Barratt developments on recently, are you engaged with them or any of the other major
we are actually. So Sue, our chief exec, she's actually director of the Future Homes Hub. So she's involved with the Future Homes Hub, so that's specifically on the kind of energy and carbon side of things. We are engaged with sort of major house builders, and we are seeing far more of those sort of middle house builders, so still building thousands of homes a year, but not the ones building sort of tens, hundreds of thousands of homes. And we really starting to see them kind of sit up and take notice. We are starting to see a lot more sort of inquiries about that, and particularly around their own sort of housing specifications, in terms of like, what should we be looking for? What's the kind of policy requirements coming over the hill? So we like, there's an interesting dynamic there around like helping to shift the mainstream, you know, and that's
Well,
what we want to
exactly.
do. Like we want to work with the mainstream.
Yeah, well, it's to make a difference, because well, you can be quite cynical with their. Well, I'm mindful of the pressures they're under, because they are completely different to smaller house building pressures.
Yeah.
But you know, they do a lot of talking, and I think you just help take them to the next, to actually deliver on it more than they're doing so at the moment. But
Yeah, the big thing with ourselves is we always have to be, you know, we always have to be mindful of, in my head, maybe this is my cynical pessimist mind, is like, are we being used here? Like, are we being used as greenwash? Like, that's the very worst
not if they're
situation.
delivering your action points.
Exactly, but it's and that's why I'm so mindful of sort of working beyond planning, because it's sort of, you know, we can say all these lovely stuff up to planning, but it's like we want to be there post planning as well, to be sort of holding that to account.
Sure.
So that's a real I think focus kind of strategic area for us. Yeah, is sort of ensuring that we're positioned beyond planning to kind of really see that, yeah, kind of really see it through, really.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. Yeah, I mean, because again, it's sort of what you're talking about, resonates with another developer we had on, Steffi Broer from Bright Green Futures in Bristol, that created a sort of eco self-build community where I've done a tour of it, and I can imagine everyone on that site knows everyone's name. Sounds a bit like Cheers, but just the way the houses are designed, and it's overlooking square and or a shared garden, that people are going to know the vast majority of their neighbours. No, it's very impressive and enlightening. If there's no more questions from anyone on the call, then yeah, just like to say thank you very much, and yeah, let you get back to your busy day. So I really appreciate everyone joining the call. I'll upload this recording shortly, and yeah, please check out next week's webinar. And yeah, Lewis, thank you once again. Very grateful.
No worries. Just yeah, lovely to be amongst sort of like-minded individuals. And I was just going to say, I'm very happy. If people are interested in Elmsbrook, I do tend to take people around and give a sort of warts and all kind of discussion about it. So maybe something to pick up.
Yeah, we had that conversation about whether we can
afterwards.
actually arrange a site visit.
Yeah. And then you could do a kind of physical or sort of like in-person event or whatever you like to do. Yeah, very happy to pick that up with you.
Definitely. No, that'd be cool. And I'd like to, if it's okay with you, I'd like to share the presentation as well and upload that to the post. So I'll do that. But no, great. Thank you very much, Lewis. Have a good afternoon.
You too. Thank you all. Speak soon.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.